Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Monday, August 25th, welcome on into the show. Friends, I'm Cherry Craig.
And I'm Avi Wolfman Arendt.
Ooh.
What was that?
I don't know.
Wait. It is a funky day in the Philadelphia region.
It is.
Were you live streaming our show on delay?
I sometimes put it on. I sometimes put the YouTube on, and I should have had my audio off. My apologies, friends.
I really was wondering what was happening in that moment.
Yeah, my apologies, friends. I did not mean to do that.
I thought I was in a dream sequence.
Well, today is the first workday under Phase 1 of SEPTA's doomsday cuts.
That's a nightmare sequence.
It is a nightmare sequence. Yes, it is. It is impacting roughly 20% of transit services. 32 bus routes eliminated, 16 bus routes shortened, reduced frequency on trolleys and trains and buses. And the timing is especially disruptive because today is also the first day of school for Philadelphia public schools. So 200,000 kids roughly going to school today, and about a quarter of them use SEPTA to get to and from school. So today we're going to be talking about the SEPTA service cuts and how they're impacting our region. And of course, we're going to also be talking about Harrisburg because the SEPTA cuts are a result of lawmakers failing to reach compromise. And by the way, our news partner 6ABC spoke with some commuters this morning, and here's how it is affecting them. Take a listen.
The bus that would have taken me from here to my new job is no longer as of Sunday. So I have to take 2 extra buses to get from here to there.
It's really slow, but I made good time this morning. But my second bus is going to put me just 1 second late.
I'm hoping that they make some changes with SEPTA because it is rough.
Yeah, and so as you can hear, it is really getting real for commuters today. And so we want to ask you, our listeners at home, elsewhere on the road, to tell us how the SEPTA service cuts how are they impacting your commute? Give us a call. And our follow-up question is, what do you think the SEPTA cuts mean for our region? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And we are currently streaming right now on YouTube and on Facebook. You heard my little delay there. And so if you're on one of those platforms, be sure to leave your comments in the live chat.
Yeah, very curious how folks are experiencing the system today if you're riding it. I've heard from some folks that it feels almost like a normal day, and maybe that's a little bit because it's still summertime and
people on vacation
still ramped up. Some people obviously feeling it, so I'm curious how you are feeling or not feeling it. 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org. Of course, this is an evolving, breaking local news story. And of course, that means WHYY's Tom MacDonald is on it. He joins us now live. Tom, how you doing?
Good afternoon. It's a crazy day out here in Philadelphia because people are trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B. A couple days ago, they were fine. They had their SEPTA routes. But now we've got dozens of SEPTA routes that have been cut. There are 52,000 students that have been impacted by this. 25% of those that go to school are involved. 32 routes eliminated. And one of the big things is the L and the Broad Street subway, there's fewer cars there. And that's big for so many things. The buses feed into the L and the subway, and people aren't making those connections as they usually do.
Tom, city leaders are not the ones negotiating the budget in Harrisburg, but they are the ones on the ground trying to deal with the aftermath of these cuts. So what are you hearing from city leaders today? What are they telling residents to do?
Well, as a matter of fact, these members of city council are speaking out this morning. They are point blankly saying to the Harrisburg politicians, you're a month overdue on delivering a budget. You need to deliver a budget now, and that budget's got to have the money necessary to fund SEPTA properly.
Wow, and you also spoke with Philadelphia School Superintendent Tony Watlington about the service cuts. What did he have to say and about the impact on the school district?
Well, the big problem with the school district is they're, like we said, 25% of the children go to school via SEPTA. This isn't, if we had to put all those yellow buses out in the road, you'd have plenty of congestion. much more problems on a daily basis. He's going to work with the students now if they're late, but they better get themselves together and figure out a way to get to class, because they've got to find a way under this new SEPTA reality. And beginning next week, it'll be even worse.
Yeah, we have a clip actually here from Superintendent Tony Watlington. Let's hear what he had to say.
We're encouraging parents to carpool and guardians to carpool to the extent they can. We've encouraged parents to take advantage of our flat rate program, where we provide $300 per family to bring your children to school. Anything else we can do, we are there to support our parents and families, and certainly we will not penalize late students.
So laying out some alternatives there. Before we get you out of here, Tommy, what else are you looking out there for today? Who else you maybe going to talk with or have spoken to already?
The mayor is definitely going to speak out. I've also spoke to Andrew Bush from SEPTA. Andrew said the morning drive went pretty well. The problems are happening at the transportation hubs. Olney Transportation Hub. You've got 69th Street Hub and Frankfurt. That's where all these new buses are not new buses, but buses are coming in with new riders on them that have to switch to another form of transportation, and that's where the backups are happening.
Those are the pain points. Well, that's Tom MacDonald, WHYY's always present Tom MacDonald, on top of the story, as always. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
All right, our second story in a trio of news stories. Villanova University fell victim to a second hoax, a.k.a. a false report, about a weapon on campus over the weekend, prompting a police investigation just 3 days after a fake active shooter alert targeted Villanova's law school. The second report on Sunday of an unspecified weapon, it caused Radnor police to be deployed to a dorm on the campus. An alert about the possible threat was sent out to students, notifying them that it could possibly be baseless. Of course, police had to clear the building, and they found out that there was no evidence of a crime. All of this comes after that fake shooter incident on Thursday that university president, the Reverend Peter Donahue, called a cruel hoax. This incident sent the campus into chaos. That's according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. It terrified students and parents. They were all on campus, Avi, for orientation festivities. The FBI, state police, county law enforcement, they're all investigating that swatting incident, which occurred just hours after a similar incident at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. They received a false report of an active shooter. And on top of all of this, the second report, which I talked about, that happened on Sunday, they had a similar incident at the University of South Carolina. So people are wondering, was this a copycat situation? And of course, we've been dealing with swatting incidents all across the country.
Yeah, it feels so random, so chaotic.
I know.
Really hard to wrap your mind around why anyone would ever want to do something like this. But your heart goes out to the folks at Villanova. I cannot imagine the drop in your stomach when you get that type of news and you think there is something happening on campus.
I know.
It's got to be so terrifying.
And today is their first day of classes. So all of this came as people dropping their kids off for the first time, dropping their kids off for their second, third, fourth years, and you get an alert like this. I got the alert and my heart dropped, and I don't have a student at the school. So, yeah.
Well, let's end on a, I guess, happy back-to-school story.
Yeah.
School District of Philadelphia is welcoming kids back to class today with some good labor news. You know, the kids love good labor news.
They do.
So late last night, the district announced it has reached a tentative 3-year deal with its largest union, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. The PFT was prepared to strike if a deal was not reached before the end of the month. Now, this is still a tentative deal. It has to be approved by the members. We don't have a lot of details yet about this deal, but this was the first major strike threat that the district had faced in many, many years, and certainly before coming back to local control in 2018. So this was a big test, and it looks like the sides have gotten together and hashed something out.
Yeah, and it's so nice to have some good news, because with the SEPTA cuts, we did not need teachers walking off the job, right? Yeah. And even though this is a deal between the school district and PFT, this is yet another win for the city of Philadelphia post the DC 33 strike, right? We had police reach a deal just a few weeks ago. So hopefully we won't be fighting with strikes or potential strikes in the near future.
Yeah, there were sort of 3 crises looming this summer. DC 33, that turned into a real crisis. SEPTA, that has turned into a real crisis. This was the other one that was hanging out there. It looks like it's going to be resolved without any major disruption for schools. I will point out the school district faces an annual budget deficit, and reserves could run out by fiscal year 2027. Again, we don't know the details of this deal, but depending on what's in the deal, those numbers, that timeline could accelerate a little bit too. So the district is facing in the future a situation somewhat similar to what SEPTA is facing today. So keep your eye on that as well.
We'll definitely be talking about that. And coming up, we're going to hear from some lawmakers today. We're going to hear from a historian. And we're going to be talking about the impact of those SEPTA service cuts on your commute. How is it affecting you? You can give us a call, 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. We'll be right back. Lots to talk about after the break. Stick with us.
And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. They've loomed as a threat for years, and now they are here. The SEPTA cuts. The transit agency has slashed service 20%. And fare hikes are just a week away if Harrisburg doesn't send more aid.
Today, we are monitoring the impact of those SEPTA cuts and talking about how we got here. This is not the first time SEPTA has shrunk. John Hepp knows all about that. He's a transit historian and professor emeritus of history at Wilkes University. John, thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
And we invite our listeners at home and on the road and elsewhere to chime into the conversation. Tell us how the SEPTA service cuts have been impacting your commute. Also, what do you think the SEPTA cuts will mean for our region? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And for those of you watching on Facebook or YouTube, put those comments in the live chat.
Certainly some disappointed to angry folks already in the comments. Keep those comments coming in. As they roll in, let's bring in a guest who is trying to solve SEPTA's funding crisis. State Senator Vincent Hughes is Democratic chair of the Appropriations Committee and represents parts of Philadelphia and Montgomery counties. Senator Hughes, welcome to Studio 2.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, Senator, I know lawmakers have been working to find a solution for the SEPTA funding crisis. Where do the negotiations stand, and is there a compromise in sight?
Well, we're, to the best of our abilities, and I'm sure you all can appreciate this, we're trying to do our best to keep the temperature down a little bit, not trying to get in as much heated public conversation so that we can make sure that there's a room and there's a path for a resolve here. However, it is very frustrating, as was said in the lead up in the introduction. This crisis, this problem has been around for a while, several years. Opportunities to solve it have been available to the General Assembly and especially the Senate Republicans who are in the majority in the Senate. They've chosen to ignore them. The House has passed a measure 5 times. Okay, not once, not twice, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 4, but 5 times. It has the support of 23 Democratic senators. It is teed up and ready to go. We would not have to be in this situation if they had recognized this problem several years ago, but also if they had acknowledged the fact that there's a solution right in front of folks to get this thing done. It is very frustrating to travel around the neighborhood, as we've been at schools early this morning, and been out in the community very early this morning, and hear the stories, some of which you all are going to talk about, that we're in this situation. Because the truth of the matter is, a reduced SEPTA system, a reduced transit system in southeastern Pennsylvania, not just impacts the folks in southeastern Pennsylvania, but it impacts everyone across the Commonwealth. When you understand and accept the fact that 42% of the state's economy is driven out of these 5 counties, Philadelphia and the other 4 counties, all right? And you understand that this region that represents what, maybe 10% of the state's total land mass, but is hugely important to everyone else in Pennsylvania. When you see that going on, and these folks wind up voting against their own interests, not just the interests of the people in this region, it is very frustrating. But we're trying to keep the temperature in check.
Let me ask you about like sort of the potential solutions floating out there. Senate Republicans want to borrow some money from this transportation trust fund in order to plug today's deficit. Democrats have said that's a non-starter. They would like to reallocate some income tax revenues to plug SEPTA's current budget hole. Are there third solutions we don't know about that are floating out there, compromise solutions? Can you give us at least maybe an outline of what some sort of compromise might look like that you've seen or heard about?
Well, the first compromise is the original proposal that, as I said, has been voted on 5 times and has at least 23 and only needs 3 more senators to support it. That's the original one. That's the first one. The proposal that they came up with essentially defunds SEPTA because it takes money from SEPTA's capital program to fix up and keep trains and buses and roadways, SEPTA systems, roadways, in good repair, and it takes it out of that and puts it in another part of SEPTA's operational. So it's essentially defunding SEPTA. And I must say that the solution that they offered up took SEPTA money and pushed it all the way across the rest of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So money programmed for southeastern Pennsylvania would be going into rural Pennsylvania. Yeah. And that's not a good deal. In addition to the fact, let me finish. Yeah. In addition to the fact that there's mandated fare increases in perpetuity. Right. That's forever fare increases. So we could go, for example, to the motor license fund, which has over $3 billion available to it, not the PTTF, which has already been discussed. The motor license fund has over $3 billion, and that is a fund that maybe has more capacity, definitely has more capacity to resolve this matter. But when you talk about mandated fare increases forever, and then you talk about only 2 years of new state money and mandated fare increases forever, that's not a good deal. And it's a politically bad deal for those 3 Republican senators who voted for it, knowing that it was bad politics. It's just terrible politics in addition to bad policy.
And so, Senator, I have a follow-up for you for there, because I've read that Democrats now see a path to flipping the Pennsylvania Senate and that you are targeting 2 Republican seats in the Southeast. Can you speak to this and how the SEPTA crisis will play into that effort?
Well, I think, look, everyone and so first of all, you really do want the Senate Democrats to be in the majority in Pennsylvania. That gives us the trifecta that allows us to move a whole bunch of major issues that impact people's lives. This issue, the issue around not having to worry about funding public education to get to the judge's order, the issue of housing, the issue of job creation and economic development. How about raising the minimum wage, which has not happened in almost 2 decades, and is only being held back by the Senate Republicans. So you do want that to happen. With respect to this moment edifies and educates people why we need a change in the political structure in Harrisburg. It just really is edifying, because what has happened is that the Senate majority, which is essentially a MAGA majority, has clamped down the interests of 3 of their members who allegedly are moderate, okay, allegedly.
The Southeast
but
Pennsylvania senators.
Clearly wants to move Pennsylvania, clearly has the opportunity to vote for an issue that could solve this problem. So, look, policy informs politics.
Yeah.
All right? And we always need to underscore the choices you make should be based on the policy decisions that were made.
Let me ask you something on those lines. You've been in your position on the Appropriations Committee for a while, and there's always been a Republican counterpart who runs the committee. For a long time, it was Pat Brown, who's now in the Shapiro administration as the Secretary of Revenue. Pat Brown, often seen as a centrist type of Republican. Now your counterpart, I believe, is Scott Martin. I'm just curious if you've noticed a change in how negotiations take place now, or the types of compromises that might be on the table because of that change in who's in leadership among the Republicans.
It's very interesting, and I can't speak to Republican politics because I'm not totally in it, but just as an observer, Pat Brown delivered huge for the people in his district and for the people in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and he was run out of the rail. He was ran out on the rails by his own party.
Right.
That makes no sense. What we are observing, quite frankly, is not necessarily congruity, if you will, between the president of the Senate, Kim Ward, the majority leader of the Senate, Joe Pittman, and the majority chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is Scott Martin. Seems to be a bit of a disconnect. That is a thing that they got to work out amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. But that disconnect really is impacting the progress of the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But as I said, it may not sound like it, but as I said, we're trying to keep the temperature down. All right.
On that note, though, of keeping the temperature down and compromise, before we get you out of here, I did want to ask about something that Senator Frank Farry talked about with us last week. Yeah. And he's a Republican state senator and represents parts of Bucks County. He had intimated that Republicans were still kind of smarting over the fact that the last time SEPTA had a funding crisis, some highway money was flexed in order to sort of resolve the issue for a year. And that they seem to be hoping that however this whole thing gets worked out with SEPTA, it includes driving some more money to roads and bridges in their district. So is that something you guys are open to? How could you see that playing out?
Every part of the proposal in the ones that have passed the House 5 different times, all right, has had resources for funding capital projects in their communities. Every one of them. It's not like it's just, well, we're only going to fund transit. We have understood for the entire time that when you deal with mass transit, you at the same time must deal with transportation, which is essentially fixing up roads and bridges and highways. All right, always understood it. All right, what Senator Farry has to consider, what he really should think about, is why did his leadership put him in a position to vote for a bad bill that does not resolve the problem? And he voted for, Pecosi, Pennicook, all folks in the SEPTA region voted for mandatory fare increases in perpetuity and voted for taking SEPTA money out and spending it on the rest of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Those three need to ask themselves, what is their future in their own caucus that has them voting against their own interests?
And Senator Hughes, as we wrap up, I just want to have you speak to the constituencies that you represent and the city of Philadelphia and the folks in the collar counties who today are dealing with the impact of those service cuts. And they feel like political footballs in between a fight between Democrats and Republicans in Harrisburg.
So I would ask folks to do their best to persevere, to work through this. I would ask folks to be thoughtful about who's taking what position, who's voting and working in their own interests. I would ask folks to, as they deal with this disruption in services, also make sure that they try to engage themselves in advocating for their own interests and, quite frankly, voting advocate for the interests of everyone in Pennsylvania. That they call the Senate Republican leadership, especially, and tell them to release the funding and to let the bills become law, to work to try to get this done. Again, Pennsylvania's best healthcare institutions, best institutions of higher learning, best cultural institutions, best job creating institutions, the number one producers in all of those spaces are right here in southeastern Pennsylvania. And as a result of that, we drive the rest of the Commonwealth's economy. And so it should be a no-brainer for the folks outside of this region to be supportive of the needs of this region, because it only helps them. I guarantee you, most of these senators and reps who are voting against SEPTA wind up at some point in their time trying to get their constituents in Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, trying to get their constituents into Drexel University, Temple University, trying to get their constituents in to see the Barnes Foundation, trying to get their constituents to see Philadelphia, and all kinds of great entities that exist in this region, because they want to access it.
Yep.
They need they want to pick fruit, and it's the trees that they're cutting the limbs off of. It makes no sense, because helping us helps them at the same time.
That is State Senator Vincent Hughes, representing parts of Philadelphia and Montgomery counties. Senator Hughes, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks, everybody. Take care now.
All right, John Hepp, transit historian. You've been listening to all of that. And I wanted to start off, John, just talking a little bit about past crises like this, where we've seen maybe service reduced or stopped completely because of a labor strike. What the knock-on effects of those have been in the past when we've had these crisis moments for SEPTA.
SEPTA takes a while to recover from any of the crisis moments. One of the longest strikes in the 1990s resulted in a 10% loss in ridership that never came back.
And how long was that strike?
I want to say 3 months.
So a 3-month strike, and then 10% of the ridership never came back.
There was, when SEPTA took over the commuter rail system, there was another 2-month-long strike. And commuter rail, I think in 2015, finally reached its pre-strike level again.
Wow. Wait, so just go back. So in the 1980s, there was a strike, and ridership dropped and didn't recover until 2015.
That's right.
Wow.
Because part of the problem is, we heard the senator talking about, mandatory future fare increases. One of the challenges is SEPTA has always been basically made to do fare increases. And the first thing you would say about SEPTA was created because there was a fear of fare increases. So the whole idea of SEPTA was to get first city and then later regional and then later state funding to keep fare increases from happening in the future. Because when they first experimented, they found out when they dropped the fares, ridership actually went up so much that it didn't matter. Because, and so one of the challenges that SEPTA has is they have to work in this strange budgetary thing where they do not know how much money they're going to get in the future. And so from every crisis they have, because I'm often asked by my students, like, when SEPTA has strikes, it doesn't happen during the school year. It happens during the school year. It happens during the election season. For the 2016 election, SEPTA was out of service in the week leading up to the election and only came back in service the day before the election. SEPTA was out of service during the 2009 World Series against the New York Yankees. And that was because of strikes. But so part of the challenge is every time you have one of these problems, people say, well, it's not worth using SEPTA. I have to come up with another alternative.
And by the way, I want to remind our listeners that the phone lines are open. So is our email, and our question of the day is for you to tell us how the SEPTA service cuts are impacting your commute. Also, what do you think the SEPTA cuts will mean for our region? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, keep those comments coming in the chat. And so I wanted to ask you a follow-up to that. I wonder, can you walk us through what happens when there is a crisis? Like, walk us through the commuter's mind and how ridership, some of the thought process of a commuter, and how ridership may dip or ebb because of a crisis.
Yeah. Well, when I used to take SEPTA to Center Cities, Philadelphia regularly, whenever there was a crisis, I was taking a train, but if the crisis was on the buses, which was the most common means of transport to have strikes, there would suddenly be this increase in ridership that would suddenly mean my train was standing room only, and it would be more difficult. And the lines at the train stations, I mean, if you were here, like, for example, when the most recent Pope visit, the line to get in 30th Street Station at one point, I think, stretched for 3 miles. And so you might have a ticket. You might be able to go, but you still had to get in the train station. And that would happen in strikes. There's photographs of outside of Reading Terminal when it was still used, that Market Street had to be closed because there's a line just trying to get into the station. So first you have the crisis of figuring out what your alternatives are. Like, for example, this morning, one of the things I had to do is there's supposedly a 20% decrease in service on both my bus line and my rail line, but I had no schedule to tell me what that 20% actually was. And so you have this sort of doubt. If I go there, will it be there? We've already heard from people that, one of the choke points are places like 69th Street Terminal and the Frankfurt Terminal. And that's because you're switching between lines. And so consequently, you may have shown up in time for your bus. Your bus may have even arrived on time. And then suddenly you've got to get into a line to get onto the L or the subway.
Yeah. Emmanuel writes us, when buying a house in Philly, one of the requirements was to be close to rapid transit. Also, I picked my house because I could commute to Newark, Delaware for my job. I don't own a car, so I'm going to have to carpool with a coworker. This is ridiculous. So we have these 20% cuts now, John. 32 bus routes cut, 16 shortened. We've got midday frequencies that are longer now on bus, and coming soon to regional rail. If this remains in effect, let's say for a couple months, but then it gets resolved, do you think that has a lingering effect on the system?
Oh, yes, it does. Because once you start to work out a different way to do things,
right.
But I sort of laugh. In order to guarantee I was in here, despite the fact I'm a committed user of SEPTA, I came in on Lyft because, basically I had to be here at a certain time and I couldn't risk it. And I couldn't risk it. And so once you start to do that, you start to make different alternatives. Like, for example, I have friends that used to work in King of Prussia, and they used to take the buses. Well, one of the bus routes that, well before this strike that got, this crisis got cut back, were the bus routes to King of Prussia. Yeah. And they went from being able to basically have a bus every 15 minutes.
People find new routes. Maybe they even find new jobs, and then all of a sudden you can't get them back.
Yeah. Or, someone who doesn't own a car has to buy a car.
Right.
And then once you buy a car, you're paying for insurance, you're paying for parking.
You're in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder, did SEPTA ever have a time when ridership was great and everything was running as it should? Because I feel like we've been talking about a SEPTA crisis. We, especially post-pandemic, just sort of ridership down, safety issues, this, that, and the third. And I just wonder, could you take us back to a time when things were good?
Well, I've got to go back to the early 1960s. In essence, Philadelphia of the 1950s was a very different place than Philadelphia of today, because Philadelphia had never had a period of economic decline other than a depression prior to that. So when the things that came to the planning to make up SEPTA, Philadelphia thought its population of 2 million was only going to get bigger and was going to continue to grow. And so it was actually planning for a very different future than the way the future came out. But what Philadelphia did very cleverly is they took their tax money and they invested in commuter trains in the city of Philadelphia. They lowered the fares, they increased the service, they brought new things. It was a glorious time. My train station went from 400 passengers a day to 2,300 passengers a day. And it was a booming time, but that was very short-lived. Why? Because you need money to subsidize the services. And SEPTA has had monetary crises almost every year since their existence. And so there's always been tinkering on the side, cutting back service. When I was a kid, there were probably 40 bus routes that ran all night long.
Yeah.
And so I could go to something in Center City and make it home by multiple routes.
People talk about this being the beginning of the death spiral for SEPTA. What you're describing is a reality where the spiral, we've been in the spiral for years and years and years.
Oh, yeah, because SEPTA was actually really formed with commuter rail as its background. The whole idea is that's what's going to tie the whole region together. And SEPTA mishandled the handover of commuter rail to it in 1982, and it was a complete and total disaster. They were the only transit authority in the Northeast Corridor that was not ready to do it because it was known a year and a half ahead of time it was going to happen. And that just created such a disaster. And I will say part of the problem that SEPTA has is it has the worst PR of any transit agency.
Oh, goodness.
We have a comment along those lines that maybe I'll read in and have you respond on the other side of this break. But here's a comment from Carolyn who says, how long will Pennsylvania allow SEPTA to blackmail the state to continue to increase funding for a transit system that fails to deliver safe and efficient service to our community? Why are public officials failing to require SEPTA to clean up its act? Carolyn goes on to say New York City does better. It talks about trash and debris on the system. So we'll talk a little bit on the other side of this break about how SEPTA compares to other large city transit systems and whether there needs to be some sort of reckoning for the folks who run SEPTA in addition to the money. You are listening to Studio 2 on WHYY. Keep those calls and comments coming. Studio 2 at WHYY.org, 888-477-9499. How is your commute going today? What do you think these SEPTA cuts mean for our region? Tell us right here on Studio 2.
Welcome back to Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent. Today we are talking about the SEPTA cuts that went into effect yesterday. There are further fare hikes and cuts just ahead of us, and we want to hear from you at home.
Yes, our phone lines are open for you on the road, on lunch break, or wherever you are. The question is, tell us how these SEPTA service cuts are impacting your commute, and what do you think these cuts will do to our region? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And for those of you watching on Facebook and YouTube, keep those comments coming in the chat.
Olivia says, I am a resident physician with Penn Medicine. I take SEPTA every morning to work, and my patients take SEPTA to get to their appointments with me. I don't know what I or my patients are going to do when these cuts hit fully. As it is, I've had multiple instances where I've been passed over by a completely full SEPTA bus in my morning commute and forced to take Uber to work. So that's Olivia. Heard from Carolyn before the break, John, about this idea that sort of SEPTA doesn't stack up well when you compare it to other major systems, and that before we pour more money into SEPTA, we really need to take a hard look at what SEPTA is doing or not doing. I'm curious what your thoughts were about that comment.
Well, I think, that's a typical Philadelphia comment.
Sure.
And I think anyone who's ridden SEPTA would not be shocked by a comment like that.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised because I've been told by people how clean SEPTA's commuter trains are compared to the commuter trains in New York, Boston, and other places. And a matter of fact, one of the strangest things I heard is SEPTA still cleans the windows on their train. And evidently New Jersey Transit gave up on that a while ago. And so I think part of the problem is SEPTA's always been short of money. And if you're short on money, there's certain things you can't do. And so consequently, one of the things is the buses are probably not cleaned anywhere near as much as they should be. But they still are cleaned, and I still ride them fairly regularly. But I think it's not the only transit authority with problems. I mean, Chicago actually is facing a bigger deficit and looking at possibly
$700 million plus for the CTA.
Yeah, and looking at even more dramatic service cuts than SEPTA is getting. Because I saw somewhere, and I forget who reported it might be you guys actually, that Chicago is fearful they're going to have poorer mass transit that Kansas City has. And I've been to Kansas City. You do not want to be poorer than Kansas City.
But unless we're talking about barbecue, of course. We do want to bring in another political voice now, Cherry. Go ahead.
Yes, we want to bring in Republican Pennsylvania Senator Frank Farry, who has been outspoken on this topic. He's also was on Studio 2. He represents parts of Bucks County. Senator Farry, welcome back to Studio 2.
Thank you for having me.
And so I wanted to start with you because we had Senator Vincent Hughes on earlier on the show. I'm not sure if you heard that, but Democrats have said that using the PTTF fund is not a tenable option. And he threw out there the motor license fund, which he says has $3 billion that is available. And we're trying to figure out if there's another solution on the table between the parties. And I want to get your reaction to this as a possible third option.
Sure, that would be more of the same of what we actually talked about last week, because a lot of that funding goes to road and bridge projects. So the concern would be with what we're talking about with the PTTF fund is that is transit dollars going to transit, right? We can talk about capital projects, we can talk about operating. And again, our analysis based on the information given to us by PennDOT is every capital project will be fully funded, even if we provide SEPTA these operating funds. If we start talking about motor licensure, we're taking money away from road and bridge projects, right? So, those that commute using vehicles rather than commute using public transit, we got to be conscious of dollars that are intended for road improvements and road maintenance for them as well. And that's part of, what we talked about last week with the $153 million that was flexed by the governor last year to operating dollars for SEPTA. So that's the first I'm hearing that proposed. Senator Hughes is the appropriations chair of, the Democrat minority. He certainly has a very loud voice in Harrisburg. I have not heard that floated before. Yeah. Maybe it has been. It certainly has not been floated in legislation that's been put before us.
Has anything floated out there since we last talked last week that sounds promising to you? Anything that sounds like compromise floating around out there in Harrisburg?
Just more political rhetoric, unfortunately. This, has a huge political spin to it. I think when you just had him on, he talked about basically trying to have a one-party system in Harrisburg by flipping the Senate. And, the last time Pennsylvania was only controlled by one party, that was under Governor Corbett. And during that time, we were able to fund Act 89, which was the largest transportation funding, certainly in my career as elected official, which provided a tremendous amount of money for roads, bridges, transit, and a lot of great things. So, and again, there's a lot of politics to be played here, and it's unfortunate that we're talking about politics, why literally residents in southeastern PA, have bus routes that were there 2 days ago that aren't there today, as they're trying to get to work. To the point of the Penn doctor, I believe that you were reading a comment from, that doctor trying to get to work, the patient's trying to see that doctor. My wife is actually being treated by one of the medical centers in the city. She got diagnosed with cancer last year. She actually drives down just because of her work schedule, but she's certainly a fan of public transit. And we know the importance of the medical facilities and the educational facilities, as well as the other industries in in Philadelphia. And I don't know if you guys saw, but the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce issued a statement yesterday supporting the money coming out of this trust fund as a short-term solution. These are the business leaders in Philadelphia, and they issued a statement endorsing the plan that was developed by the Senate Republicans.
I want to ask you a question because I understand last week you guys called out, you yourself, Senator Farry, as well as two of your Senate colleagues on the Republican side, called out SEPTA, said you guys have not had a chance to talk to them. They've been non-responsive. Has that changed since that became public late last week, last Thursday?
Sure. So 2 weeks ago tomorrow, so 2 Tuesdays ago, was the last time we had heard from SEPTA. I talked to them that night of the vote, after the vote. Senator Picozzi talked to them Wednesday morning. And then we haven't heard from SEPTA since then. We sent a letter Friday of that week. We sent a letter again midweek last week. Scott Sauer actually called me on Friday. We had an hour and a half long meeting with him this morning, myself, Senator Picozzi, and Senator Pennycook. It was, I would say, a dialogue that should have happened a few weeks ago. SEPTA went dark, but, unfortunately, SEPTA representatives were able to attend policy hearings for the House Democrat Committee and all these different things. And there were a lot of important things we talked about today that SEPTA, is willing to listen to. I hope they have the reality that the ultimate solution may be dollars coming from this fund. We talked about their capital plan extensively, and we're operating with the information PennDOT has given us, and they're in a very similar boat. It was nice the dialogue was opened again. We talked about the restoration of routes. We talked about alternatives. Senator Picozzi brought up about alternatives for routes being run for the students. The windows of time when kids are going to school and maybe getting some route restoration there for the SEPTA commuters. We talked about the sports fans, and the impact that they're going to have there and why SEPTA chose to do that. So, we're trying to find solutions. It was nice to have a dialogue. It was about an hour and a half long meeting. But again, that was dialogue that should have been had a couple weeks ago. And it's unfortunate because SEPTA, has come out and said that they're concerned about the impact of our plan on them, but they're basing that on the limited information they have from PennDOT. And, we went over the numbers we have. Yeah. And, I'm hopeful they're a little more comfortable after we talked to them today. But, ultimately negotiations are going on in Harrisburg to hopefully bring a resolution to this. But, the three
Did they provide
senators,
alternate numbers or any other information that would impact your decision to use this fund, the PTTF fund?
No, because they were talking about their funding needs over the next 12 years going through 2037. And, it's kind of hard to forecast some of that based on the information we have from PennDOT. We forecasted the next 5 years, and I'll just give you a simple answer. And I said, if it turns out you get to 2032 and you're looking at a capital shortfall for 5 years down the road, then that's a problem we should be talking about then. When we know the money's sitting there now, we know the next 5 years of capital projects will be fully funded, and there will still be a surplus in that account for other capital projects, and the money can be used for operating today. And, I think there's a bit of a realization from them, because I don't know where the other money comes from. I know Speaker McClinton was on after me last week. I don't believe she answered you where the money is coming from for their plan with the sales tax, whether it's just adding to the state structural deficit or it's going to cut programs. We still don't have any answers on that on their program. And I do want to correct something Senator Hughes said. The roads and bridges being included in the House Democrat plan, that is something that only came about in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. That is a recent thing. That is not something that was in all 5 bills that they sent over to us.
Right. No, just thank you for bringing that up. We do have to let you go now, Senator Frank Farry, but appreciate you making some time for us again this week, and look forward to talking to you again down the road. And of course, wishing your wife a speedy recovery and good health. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
I wanted to read in a few more comments because we're getting toward the end of this hour. Yeah. Carolyn says, I hate to see everyone beating up on SEPTA at this fragile time when it's under attack. I'm 77. I use SEPTA often, feel it is safe and reliable. So Carolyn's was opposing views this hour. Different Carolyn's. Matt says, in my humble opinion, screaming SEPTA writers and Democrats won't do anything unless non-writers get on board. Matt says SEPTA needs to focus on marketing in the sense that SEPTA needs to speak to how its services impact drivers who are the majority of commuters. So that's Matt's PR plan. Let's bring in Paul from Bristol on line 7. Hey, Paul, you're on Studio 2. Real quick, what's your question or comment?
Okay, first, thanks very much for dealing with this situation because it is dire.
Yeah.
I ride SEPTA rail. I've already seen cars from 4 cars cut to 2 cars or 3 cars. People standing packed in like sardines. Not every day, but some days last week. And I just want to make the point that cutting these rail lines to Trenton and Paoli, Chester County, Bucks County, Montgomery County, pay the highest taxes of any counties in this state and get less back per dollar put into the state. And I think that the Republican congressmen, I don't know whether they're part of Trump's whole MAGA game or not. Either way, they're going to find out that they're doing damage to other Republicans, and they really need to think about what they're doing. Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate
Paul
your
from
program.
Bristol.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. So, John, you've been listening to a lot here. I'm just curious what's been going through your head and how you think we get out of this, because it does feel like a crisis that's on the doorstep of another crisis here.
And I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
That part of the problem is someone used the term death spiral. And while I won't say it begins here, this is a problem that SEPTA has had for a while. And SEPTA has always been focused on long-term funding solutions. And I think they're trying to get one out of this, which is why they were against the transfer of the capital money again.
It's like when you're in a moment of crisis, at least get something that sets you up for a few years down the road instead of being just a 2-year solution.
That's right. And I do think that's what SEPTA has to do in the long term. Now, I am not a political analyst, I'm a historian, but I would say I don't think now is a good time to go anywhere and ask for long-term public transit funding. And I think sadly both SEPTA and Philadelphia have to work out a more realistic set of possibilities that gets them funded so there are still trains tomorrow. Because after all, I heard the one comment that there were 2-car trains last week. That wasn't because of this funding crisis. That was because the 45-year-old equipment needs to be replaced. And so one of the reasons why SEPTA doesn't want to use its future funds is they need to replace that equipment. So I think part of the challenge that SEPTA has is they just have too many balls in the air and they don't see a way out. And I think one of the things they need to do is perhaps be realistic. We can be here tomorrow. We can be here next year. We can be here 2 years from now. And let's hope the American political scene changes a bit in those 2 years.
Hold on, basically.
Your thing is survive.
Yes.
Just survive this crisis and live to fight another day. I want to read a couple comments because we have to wrap up. Fish 1999 says, they cut a bus near me, and how the heck am I supposed to get to Penn State University? I like taking the bus. SEPTA is being inconsiderate. So there's an angry commuter mad at SEPTA. Mimi comments, I had a confusing experience this AM. The bus in my Chester County neighborhood was eliminated. The sign saying so went up weeks ago, and SEPTA's website confirmed that just now. But this morning, I saw that bus go by. Its route signage brightly lit on its usual route as I was coming out of the public library. What the heck? So a lot of confusion as people try to cope with these service cuts.
Well, thanks for at least explaining why we're here, John Hepp, Professor Emeritus of History at Wilkes University, transit historian. John just knows basically everything. And thanks for sharing some of that everything with us today, John.
Happy to be here. Enjoyed it.
Yes, and thank you to everybody who called in. Sorry we couldn't get to you, Kathleen from Bucks County, or Rich from Reading. Please continue listening to the show and calling in again. Thanks to our producers, Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Calicay engineer today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory. From Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent, wishing you a not so headachy commute home. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow. And coming up tomorrow on the program, flu and COVID season are quickly approaching for many people. It's time to get your seasonal shot in the arm. However, under HHS Secretary RFK Jr.'s leadership, vaccine recommendations have gotten pretty darn muddled.
So tomorrow, we'll talk about the changes in vaccine policy under the Trump administration and what it means for your health. Coming up next on WHYY, we have Here and Now. Lots to come this afternoon, and we'll see you on the radio tomorrow.